CKnappenberger, and this is the case study for Module 13 for EDL851 in the fall of 2018. A good teacher turns bad. In Category 1, in problem identification and the analysis, the things that I do know. I know that Mrs. Wilson is the principal at Crestview Elementary and has been for the last 3 years. Mrs. Horton is a first grade teacher at Crestview Elementary. She was former teacher of the year. Recently, she seems to be less friendly and more stressed. She also seems less committed to planning for anything, her programs or anything like that. She noticed this about that, and she attacked a new reading program in the new school year. Mrs. Horton is very negative about the new reading program, and she also seems to be attacking the teachers who support the program. Mrs. Wilson, the principal, conferenced with her about her behavior at a meeting, and it did not seem to change her behavior. So phone calls started coming in the new school year about Mrs. Horton's behavior in class. So originally the parents were calling the principal, Mrs. Wilson, and Mrs. Wilson responded with the fact that she had observed the classroom in recent days and that this didn't seem to be an issue and that she didn't observe any of those behaviors. But then after the phone calls to the principal, there started to be phone calls to the superintendent's office, and the superintendent contacted in the fact that parents were concerned about her behavior to the students and also that she wasn't returning any parent phone calls. Mr. Stafford, a parent, calls the principal then and demands that his student be removed from Mrs. Horton's class. So before that happens, Mrs. Wilson decides that she's going to set up a conference between Mr. Stafford and Mrs. Horton and Mrs. Wilson. So when Mr. Stafford comes in in the morning for the conference itself, Mrs. Horton is not prepared. She invites them into her classroom, but she's not prepared. They're asked kind of what their concerns are and what his goal, Mr. Stafford's goal, is in having this meeting, and he would like his student to be removed from Mrs. Horton's class and expresses his concerns as to why. Mrs. Horton becomes extremely defensive and starts yelling at the meeting, yells at the parent, calls him a liar, and from there, Mrs. Wilson, the principal, asks Mr. Stafford to leave, saying that she will discuss the problem with Mrs. Horton. Things that I do need to know. What's happening day to day in Mrs. Horton's class? What is actually going on? Are the students telling the full truth about what's happening? How is Mrs. Horton treating these students? What is going on with Mrs. Horton personally in order to kind of make her react the way that she reacted in the parent meeting and also to bring in those phone calls from parents? What is it that I can do to calm Mrs. Horton down? And then how can we cover Mrs. Horton's class so that the situation can be handled today and then moving forward? How can I help Mrs. Horton moving forward? And then finally, is Mrs. Horton still interested in keeping her job or continuing to be an educator or in the education field? The biggest problem is that Mrs. Horton is struggling to meet her students' needs and that she's no longer providing a safe and comfortable learning space for her students to learn and to gain the skills they need. So the plan of action, Category 2. My plan of action has 2 areas of focus. The first thing is supporting my teacher and providing Mrs. Horton with support to be mentally well so that she can be back in the classroom if that's what she needs and that's what's best for the school and the district. And then also providing Mrs. Horton's first graders with a safe learning space, making them feel comfortable in that learning environment again. So the plan of action for Mrs. Horton's well-being is having Mrs. Horton leave for the rest of the day. I do feel like after conferencing with her and talking to her, the best thing might be for her, especially since this took place right in the morning, is having her kind of go home for the day and kind of reevaluate and meet with her either the following day or whenever I think is appropriate. Her taking a leave of absence, whether it's a short leave of absence, a couple of days, or maybe it's a longer leave of absence to kind of get herself together and decide what it is that she wants to do and if she can be successful in the school environment still. Recommending her to a counselor or seeking help in some way, whatever that may look like. And then finally, when she does return, we're providing her with professional development. And then also the plan of action looking for Mrs. Horton's students. She will be taking a leave of absence, whether that's long or short or however that's going to look. Finding a qualified substitute. Also having a counselor meet with the students if they have been going through a situation in which they are no longer comfortable in their learning environment. We want to make sure that they are comfortable again and that school is still a safe space for them in which they're comfortable and they're kind of nurtured in order to grow. And then backtrack on any missing skills. If this has been going on since the beginning of the year, we want to kind of like backtrack, see where the students are at, and kind of get some data there in order to kind of be able to fill in those missing spaces. The last thing for their students is meeting with their parents, whether it's meeting as a whole group, having different parent conferences to discuss kind of what will happen. And if Mrs. Horton is put back in the classroom and that's deemed acceptable, inviting the parents in for an open house so they can see kind of what's been going on, and if they're comfortable, to make them more comfortable with the environment that they are in. And also, if Mrs. Horton is not going to be staying there, kind of bringing in the substitute and also having the parents come in for an open house to essentially see what's going on in the first grade classroom. Strategies for implementation. Professional development. Looking for providing professional development and allowing leave time to attend professional development. This is for Mrs. Horton, especially if she's coming back to work. Making sure that she has all the skills and everything necessary, because she does have them. She was an outstanding teacher beforehand, and there's no reason why she can't go back to that and be back at the level that she was at. Also, maybe perhaps providing professional development to a new substitute if that is the case. Upon her coming back to work, Mrs. Horton, regular walkthroughs of her classroom, weekly meetings with Mrs. Wilson, the principal, and making sure that her class is being observed so that we don't fall back into any bad behaviors that we had beforehand, and also meeting with the principal regularly to make sure that everything is being met. And again, that's if this works out and that she does still remain in her position. If the plan of action leads to having to find a substitute, posting the job, interviewing candidates appropriately, and making sure that they find a good replacement for her in that classroom, so that the students will not have any more of a gap in skills than they may already have from what's happened so far this year. In category 3, resolving the issues based on promoting student success. We want to make sure that the students are throughout these changes that are occurring, that the students have success. So what's best for the students? What's best for the students is having a teacher that provides a safe and inviting learning environment and who cares about their well-being and success. As a principal, you're hoping that a staff member who's been there for a long time and has contributed positively to the community can come back and do that again. But if that's not the case, then finding a suitable substitute so that the students, or replacement if need be, for the students in the first grade. Some of the data for best practice, looking at the students no longer feel safe in Mrs. Horton's class. So that needs to be looked at. In the case, it talks about the parent saying that she upsets the children. She yells at the children. Mr. Stafford states that, if this is how she treated me, imagine what the kids go through every day. So Mrs. Horton does need to be removed until she's capable of providing a safe learning environment again. And again, hoping it's her. And if it's not her, then maybe someone else. Mrs. Horton is going to have to be able to prove herself capable to the community. This goes back to, she berated teachers at a meeting. She was verbally abusive to children. There needs to be steps and criteria for Mrs. Horton to prove that she's capable of teaching and properly interacting. Again, as the principal, Mrs. Wilson needs to decide what those steps may be. And then finally, because Mrs. Horton is capable of being an effective teacher. She was, like I said, in the case study, she was a former teacher of the year. She has a seasoned professional. She has the skills necessary to be that teacher again. We just kind of need to make sure that we can bring that out in her. She should also have the opportunity in order to kind of rectify the situation before she is actually terminated. Category 4, debriefing the problem, looking for a solution. So things that I'm thinking about while I'm trying to figure out how to handle the case study is, I'm thinking that the parents need to be comfortable with the outcome. The students, obviously, we're worried about them, but we want to make sure that the parents are comfortable with the outcome of the situation. I'm feeling hopeful for an outcome that allows Mrs. Horton back into the classroom. She had such a successful career beforehand, kind of hoping that she can get back to that. And I'm valuing the students' needs to feel valued and cared for in school. They're first graders and they really need to love. This is a place where we can teach them to love school and think of it as a place to learn and grow and be nurtured. And I'm valuing their need for that. Some unresolved issues, Mrs. Horton's mental state after this incident, after everything that's kind of occurring kind of I don't know how she's going to feel. We don't know if she's going to be able to come back, or if she wants to come back. Parents' reaction to the plan of action, parents, how they might react to having her back in the classroom. They may not want her back there. If they're comfortable with the substitute and all those other kind of things, after their kids have been through a trauma of dealing with an abusive teacher, is how they feel, making sure that they're comfortable with the plan of action. Also, if Mrs. Horton does return, those students' comfort level, I don't know if maybe classes might have to be changed around, or enrollment might need to be flipped around a little bit, to kind of make sure that the students are comfortable in their learning environment. And after kind of some of the things that may have happened with Mrs. Horton up until this point, that could be something that's still unresolved. My reflection. So how I look at applied my knowledge and promoted academic success by enhancing instructional capacity. We want to make sure that, the instructional capacity of the teacher, whoever that may be, helps academic success of all students. Mrs. Horton will only be allowed back if she can teach and she can show that capability to teach. All skills that are lacking in the classroom will be reviewed with the substitute, again, looking to collect data and things like that in order to make sure that those children's skills are met moving forward if there is a gap. Also looking at the fact that in order to make sure that does happen, the students will be provided a qualified substitute. This will not just simply be a substitute, out of the substitute pool, looking for a long-term sub that may have to be there in order to help the students kind of meet their needs and close any gaps that might exist. Looking at their personal well-being, enhancing instructional capacity and looking at their personal well-being is the counselor, to meet with all the students, to talk to them. Any student who is still feeling anxiety or upset about anything that did occur in the beginning of the year, kind of having a counselor meet with them. Meeting with the parents and making sure that we address any kind of parent concerns, again, by opening up the building and the school to kind of have them come see the first grade classroom after, everything kind of settles, to make sure that they're comfortable with their students' personal well-being day to day. And again, meeting with them first and then allowing to reassure that safety of that open house during the day. This is the source of the case study. Thank you very much for watching.